Hello and welcome to episode 218 of Nuggets Dungeon Terrain. I want to start off by saying a big thank you to the 120 people who so far have purchased Wastelands Highway. If you want a chance to see what this is about and purchase your own copy, then you can follow the link in the description below. In this Gaslands car vlog, I'm going to show you my 3 Gaslands UK Car of the Month entries. In November we had to join at least 2 cars together, so the first challenge was to, using a hacksaw, cut this hot rod in half. I was then going to put it on top of this slightly oversized Hummer. The hot rod was chopped up to make part of the palisades on the top level, basically of this gun deck. There's a couple of flamethrowers on the back and a couple of rifles that are mounted on the front. The tanks for the flamethrowers are just broken up parts of an old DVD player, and the rifles on the front are the exhaust pipes from a small truck. I took the skull emblem and the engine block from the hot rod and put them back on top of the Hummer. I also took a couple of extra tyres on the sides. Unfortunately, I didn't finish the tyres off very well. I forgot to add some extra layers to them and do some extra paint work. The mesh is from an old filter, the one that goes above a range hood on your stovetop. And after I cut out the sections to cover the windows and the side panel, I had these jagged pieces left and decided to use them to cover the front wheel arches. The painting is pretty standard, and because it's by brush and not airbrush, it really shows up badly when you do your close-ups. It's kind of obvious that with a lot of my gluing I use the baking powder and super glue technique. I actually don't mind this because it builds up areas that look like big wads of rust. In those areas I apply a crushed up, soft pastel, basically poor man's modelling pigment. Next up, and December had a desert racer theme. I decided to make something just a little bit different. I wanted to be able to use all of these cars, both for Gaslands and for Wastelands Highway. So I made a car carrier, something that could deploy a whole bunch of dune buggies. I pictured that these could be used as some kind of drop ship for scouts or fighters. To make it modular and multi-use, I added these magnets. There's actually 2 sets of magnets you can see there. One of them is to join to the metal underneath this I-beam to suspend the car, and the other one is for when the car's separate, I have a flat area to mount a weapon. Where this articulation occurs, there's actually a rubber piece, not a solid piece, to give it some flexibility, especially when I take it in or out. To make it a little bit more realistic, I made it so that they were suspended more towards the back, because in these vehicles that's where the engine is. Each of these buggies is totally suspended and doesn't touch the ground, but I figured if they did and it was the front wheels, they would be free rolling and it wouldn't cause too much of a problem. I've never had a 3D printed part for any of my Gasland stuff. Everything is some kind of improvised piece of junk. Each of the buggies is done up a little bit differently and has some panels to make it look like parts of them were ripped off other vehicles. One of them has a door and another one has a bonnet from a white Beetle. There's a spot for the buggy drivers to sit as it's moving along and a small lookout tower on the back. And here's the towing vehicle. These are the parts I use to make the mounted guns. Again, the exhaust pipes from a truck turn into a pretty cool improvised gun. And finally, my upcoming January build. Now, Japanese style is not really my cup of tea, but I do like World War II, so I decided to turn this really ugly van into a kamikaze. A lot of the parts on this are recycled and pieces of rubbish that I've found recently. We've done a lot of walks on the beach, so for example, this bit that will become the cover on the front is actually the bottom of someone's shoe that was ripped off, probably floated in on the tide. Whatever this was, plenty of plastic washes up on the beach, unfortunately, and I recycled that. Here's an old piece of a cat food tin. It's going to be used for some of the plating. My wife won an auction, and the auctioneer shoved this whole bunch of platypus lapel pins in a bag inside of the item that she won, just so they could get rid of it. And of course, I said I'd take those, and I turned them into the bombs that will be attached to the front of the vehicle. Here you can see I've bent the metal rods to make them look more like cables, and in the very front I've added a piece of toothpick to make it look like the detonating needle at the front. I used all the parts of these large cable ties. I'm going to use some of them as the side runners to protect the tyres. And instead of painting a rising sun on top, I decided to use the rest of the cable ties to make it look like there was some kind of metal panel work that was on top. This would make a really cool car that everyone would want to stay away from in a game of Gaslands. And in Wastelands Highway, there are enemies that basically do bombing kamikaze runs, so it'll work perfectly there as well. So thanks for watching, and hopefully there's a couple of ideas there that you might be able to use, even if it's just reminding you to keep all of the interesting pieces of rubbish that you find.